Hello, everybody. My name is Aldo Pennini. I am an associate with Strategia Worldwide, a risk management firm based out of London. I have 13 years experience in the mining sector, and I'm delighted today to host a panel on a very important topic, particularly around the pandemic we're living through at the moment. The issue is, how has COVID-19 disrupted skills mobility in the mining and resources industry? In particular, what impacts is this having on cross-border transactions, exploration and operations, investor due diligence, and local skills and communities? To discuss the topic, I'm joined by three distinguished people who have had some sort of experience with mobility issues during this time, starting with Warren Gilman, Chief Executive Officer of Queen's Road Central Capital. Warren is a mining engineer with more than 30 years experience as a deal maker in the metals and mining sector. He was a founder of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce Global Mining Team in Toronto in 1988, and responsible for some of the largest equity capital markets financings in Canadian mining history. From 2011, he led CEF Holdings Limited, a global mining investment company. Dale Maher is Vice President Corporate Development at Endeavour Silver Corp. Dale is a geologist with 20 years experience in the mining industry. He has held senior positions in mineral exploration, investment research, and project evaluation throughout his career. And company has worked for include Cominco, BHP, Terra Diamond Corp, and Quintana Resource Capital. John Madew, Head of Mining and Resources at the Centre of Excellence as part of Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade. John began his career as an analyst in credit insurance and trade finance. He is now responsible for overall strategic oversight and guidance at Austrade, covering the mining sectors, resource sectors, providing advice to business and governments. He has held senior roles in Austrade's overseas operations, covering the sub-Saharan Africa and South Asian regions, as well as Canada and the UK. And finally, Chris Cawood, Chief Information Officer at OceanaGold. Chris has over 25 years experience in the resources sector across oil, gas and mining. He has been with OceanaGold as Chief Information Officer for the past 4 years. Prior to that, he has had an extensive history in technology-based practices across Australia and indeed the world. Before moving to Melbourne and OceanaGold, he held a number of technical roles at BHP in Sydney, then the Netherlands and Perth. So to kick things off, gentlemen, I just want to ask you a very simple question. Is this an important topic to you? If I could start with Warren, please. Just a few words each by way of introduction. Thank you.
Well, as you said, thank you for that introduction. I'm a mining engineer by background, and I founded Queen's Road Capital last year to carry on the work that I originally started at CEF Holdings, working for Li Ka-shing, investing his money in mining projects around the world. So Queen's Road is a Toronto-listed company. So we're not a fund, it is a company. Oddly enough, most of our shareholders are Australian-based. So I'm a Canadian running a Caymans-based company listed in Toronto with Australian shareholders. So just like this call, a rather international effort. And over the course, we did our first closing in February, raised $85 million. And so that means that over this entire COVID period, we've been putting that $85 million to work. And the challenges of doing due diligence on significant investments over the course of the last 8 months is probably one of the reasons why I'm on this panel. It's a very topical subject and something that has real life implications and has had real life implications for me and my investors over the last 8 to 10 months.
Great, Warren. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dale. Why is this an important topic for you?
Yeah, thanks, Aldo, and thanks to the organizer for inviting me. So, yeah, from my perspective, travel is essential. You know, when conducting due diligence on M&A opportunities, I always first start off with desktop studies. So these obviously can be done from anywhere. That focus on spreadsheets, technical reports, basic Q&A. However, the next crucial stage is always includes a site visit. You know, you see so much more of the surroundings, the communities nearby, or lack of the people affected, and even access to the sites. So, you know, I remember visiting some sites by horseback in South America, thinking that there's just going to be so many logistical challenges to any sort of development there. Plus, even grassroots exploration is going to be terribly expensive. So, conversely, there are some sites that brag to be road accessible, but they aren't always as advertised. Yeah, one of the worst drives I've ever had was on a winding 8-hour drive through the Andes, and all I could ever think of was, well, how the heck is a 777 going to make it up here? So, and that brings up another point. Drives can be incredibly informative. The conversations are just so much more casual, and you just have more time to have discussions with people other than an elevator pitch from a CEO. So, I had once asked a mine GM, and this is a kind of a question I ask almost on all my site visits, is what keeps you up at night? He spilled the beans on all sorts of problems that he's dealing with that never gets communicated through formal calls. So, basically, in-person site visits give the opportunity to discover things that never make it into a PowerPoint.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Dale. Over to you, John, for a bit of a government perspective, perhaps, given your international role as well.
Yeah, sure. And I think it starts at a very personal place for me in the restricted mobility. I was stuck in India in April, May of this year, finishing my posting as General Manager for our South Asian region, and personally experienced what the restriction in travel really does to life. I've lived in the UK, South Africa, India, Canada, as well as Australia, and our sector has really thrived on this international ability to travel and the people-to-people links. And from the government side, we see that trade and investment is going to be a key part of the recovery of the Australian economy post the pandemic. So we have a really key interest in this issue around mobility, both how it has maintained the economy, but how it is going to be part of our road out of this COVID situation.
Great, John. Thank you. And yourself, Chris.
Thanks, Aldo. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for the invite to attend today. So I think there's two aspects I can think of, both from a company and a personal point of view. Personally, I've been spending way too much time in this room because the Melbourne government has put some quite harsh restrictions on to maintain and manage the virus. And I don't think I've seen my team in person for 8 months. So just that connection with each other is so that personal connection, and like Dale was talking about, is that you do get so much more when you're at site and locations where you can have conversations. You see past what's on pieces of paper or spreadsheets. So missing all of those connections with people. And teammates, and then and you're being able to pull together and solve problems in a group way. So this has been the norm quite a lot, sitting here talking to screens. So and that takes a bit of adjusting to get used to. But then from our business and our operations, where you're very much you rely on bringing in expertise from different locations, bringing in the ability for people to ramp up for projects. So the operations that we're running, they don't burst. The local community isn't supplying all those specialists and technical people that we need for specific projects and work. So being able to move those people internationally, we've just relied on that for up until recently. So the project side and that's access to specialised skills on site has been something we're having to deal with this year.
Thanks, Chris. And that's a good point, actually, as you're getting into sort of the direct impacts of the restrictions to mobility. We're also talking here about transactions, exploration, mine operations, so the real business of mining being impacted. You mentioned resourcing of skills. To the rest of the panel, how is the pandemic impacting those particular elements for those of you that are engaged in those parts of mining? And if you can give some examples.
Sure, I'll take that question first. You know, on an M&A perspective, again, you know, basically we just can't work as fast. You know, I've been involved with some transactions where, you know, I'd finish a conference call and the very next thing I do is call my travel agent to see how soon I can get to site. With COVID, you know, there are all sorts of different health protocols. You know, some countries require proof of a negative test before you go on a flight. There's quarantine requirements that, you know, once you arrive in certain countries. At these complications, you know, to the fact that there just aren't as many flight options available. Like, you know, they're just so very limited to what we had a year ago. So that, and also the potential quarantine requirements, right? Canada, for example, has mandatory 14-day quarantine for anyone, even Canadians that are entering the country. And I believe Australia has or had the same kind of requirement. So normally a site visit can be done in 3 to 5 days, but when you're adding 14 days before you even get to a site, it just makes timing a lot more difficult than, you know, the pre-COVID times. So speed.
Yeah. Warren and John, any comments on that?
Yeah, no question. I would concur with that. Speed has a material effect when you're going to a country that has a 2-week quarantine, and we're faced with that currently at our next investment. But thankfully, over the course of the last 8 months, we really haven't been tremendously inconvenienced for 2 reasons. First of all, I'd preface by saying, you know, it's part of our policy that we have to put boots on the ground and visit the project before we make any investment. So we do have that requirement. And that is a requirement which in this environment, as you might expect, can be challenging. But I have the benefit of experience. There aren't many mines on planet Earth that I haven't been to. There aren't many development projects on planet Earth that I haven't been to. So our first 2 investments, we benefited from that in that I'd already been there multiple times, didn't have to go again. We made the investment without having to make a visit during COVID and still be able to do our appropriate due diligence. The one I mentioned earlier, I think before we started recording, was our most recent investment in Adriatic, which is based in Bosnia, in the Balkans. And that is one project, and given the history of the country, perhaps understandably, that I hadn't visited previously. And it was a question of getting there. Thankfully, again, we weren't too inconvenienced because the travel restrictions to get to Bosnia were not that limiting. You know, we didn't have a 2-week quarantine, for example. You just had COVID tests at the airport, and that allowed us to get there. Of course, then when you get home, you have to deal with your home quarantine, but at least that doesn't delay your site visit trip. So, knock on wood, to date, we haven't been terribly inconvenienced, but I do see that as time drags on and you've made investments already in projects that you've previously done due diligence on, the next ones you do are going to be ones that perhaps you need to spend the time and effort. And that's going to impact not only the investment side of the business, my side of the business, but, you know, my colleagues at Endeavour and Oceana more and more through this period, if they're engaged in M&A. Undoubtedly is going to slow things down and impact at least, if not the ability to due diligence, at least the time involved in executing the due diligence.
Thanks, Warren. And I guess, John, as someone who's trying to promote trade, how is the current situation manifesting itself from a government perspective?
From our perspective, Austrade runs a network of offices in close to 60 countries around the world. So we do have a boots on the ground presence that remains in place and with the ability to service clients. From an internal perspective, we have a number of expat positions placed around the world, and that will always make it more difficult for us to place people in those positions when you restrict the travel and movement with the different quarantine regimes around the world. But our offices remain open and remain able to service Australian businesses that are interested in looking at these markets. Our local in-market representatives are keeping touch with major projects, with major contacts, so they are still able to facilitate business. But of course, our clients, the Australian exporters, are finding it difficult to travel like everyone else is. So we're always looking at new means to connect with them, to connect buyers with sellers in all those countries. So it has changed the dynamic of our business quite a bit, but we've always run this dispersed global network. So we've been used to working virtually, the going to sort of home working for our staff. You know, we've had the video facilities available. We've just really stepped up the use of those, and I think as we've seen our clients do as well. So it's making life more difficult, but we are able to manage in that environment reasonably well.
And I guess we've touched on the challenges, and we can come back to those. But do you see any sort of positives, any opportunities arising from this disruption that COVID is causing to mobility?
I think. Oh,
perhaps.
Sorry, I'm happy to talk on that one. I think it's disrupted the entire global economy. We all know that, and mining is a very international business. But I guess if you look at the three key impacts that it has, yes, people are physically constrained to a location, and we can't travel like we used to. Supply chains have been disrupted, and this is obviously impacting on mines, and the just-in-time supply chain wasn't designed for this. But there are also examples of resilience. You know, we've seen, for example, the Western Australian or most Australian mines continue to operate fairly efficiently. So this is important because I think in the future, we're going to see this environment set the direction for mine planning and operation. So the mine of the future is going to be more technology driven, reducing the reliability of physical proximity to people and supplies. So supply chains are going to be shortened and with less reliance on this international sourcing. And I think Australia is well positioned. We're a leader in automated mining at home, and our met sector is world leading for their products and services that can supply the mine of the future. And from a commodity supply point of view, our miners have shown the resilience and have been able to continue supply where many of our competitors haven't been able to do that. So I think for Australia, there's a kind of good news, bad news side to that. You know, we have probably fared better than most of our competitors.
I guess, Chris, back to you as a miner. Some of the opportunities that may be coming out of this challenging period.
Well, I think our CFOs probably appreciated the reduction in travel spend, but apart from that, we're able to do some things that we wouldn't have tried previously. So, for example, we have an annual strategy conference. Post the board session, we'd have an annual strategy conference with our leaders, and everyone was pretty much scattered around the globe, and we're able to all come together doing a video conference, facilitated strategy and workshop, and to basically how are we going to keep driving the company forward. So you basically change and adapt to the circumstances, and we use what technology is available. But that was surprisingly well received, and we had some good outcomes out of that. The only thing we really miss would be, that sidebar conversation, or those, you get that corridor or after the sessions, it basically relationship building. But apart from that, the work of the day was done, and we're able to really see through it, which is interesting. We would have tried it. without what happened with COVID.
And what about yourself, Dan?
Yeah, well, with our company and the operations that we have in Mexico, I'd say we have become more focused geographically speaking, right? So, we're able to deploy our kind of in-country expertise and easily get to site in Mexico. So, we focus more on geographies where we actually have people on the ground, and that gives us kind of a leg up if we want to go see a project. In Chile, in Mexico, one of our guys is in Peru, even in Uruguay. We can send some people to the site still, and kind of gets us around the transborder issues. So that obviously will shorten our timeline, and it enables us to move faster than some potential competition. So I'd say that, yeah, in this time we kind of focus more geographically on places that we can kind of get to easily. So, but that being said, I'd say, to comment earlier about experience, yeah, that we've seen a lot of different projects and a lot of different management teams in the past 20 years or so. So there's a lot of companies that you would invest in, a lot of people that you would invest in that you trust, without even going to site. So that's also the opportunity, just putting your trust into relationships instead. So heck, even this summer there was a large transaction worth several $1 billion, and from what I heard, nobody even went to site because they could get to site. But in that case, the company just decided they really, really wanted it, and they bought it, knowing that probably no one else would likely buy it without getting to site first.
That's interesting. What about yourself, Warren? Opportunities.
Yeah, I'd hate to say that there was anything good that came out of COVID, but I must say, and touching on some similar points of my colleagues on the call, I think it has made all of us a heck of a lot more efficient. Board meetings that used to run at least 15, 16 hours seem now to be done just as efficiently in 2 hours. You haven't had to spend a day traveling to North America and a day traveling back. So, you accomplish in 2 hours what ordinarily would have taken you 3 days. The same with conferences. Rather than allocating a week of your time to go to a conference, including travel time, you do a Zoom call and you get the conference done in a day and largely accomplish the same thing you would have accomplished if you had been there. Now, I agree totally that that's a temporary fix. It's always much more beneficial to meet in person and have that interpersonal dialogue and relationship building. But certainly for a year or two, you make much more efficient use of time. And frankly, I think some of that is going to continue on into the post-COVID world. We recently held our AGM. It was an all virtual AGM. It didn't require me or anyone else to get on a plane and travel anywhere, rent a hotel ballroom or meeting room. You save money, you save time, you save expense, and you still achieve what you need to achieve. And I think developments like that will probably survive the post-COVID world, both for financial reasons and practicality reasons.
I guess the supplementary question that we haven't really touched on in any great depth, local communities and skills availability. Are you able to make any comments on, pre-COVID, a lot of travel, skills moving from different parts of the world to others where they're more needed. Do you sense at a local level that is having some sort of impact? What I mean by that, are you able to source skills locally where we're not able to travel? And if not, what steps can you take to overcome that? Do any of you have a sort of examples that you might share?
Well, certainly I'll address that one right away. Our operations, one of our operations in Mexico is a camp setting. So it's it's not really remote. It's just in a location where we have to bring in, I guess, our employees from various parts of Mexico. But I'd say in that case, most of the travel is all in country. It's if anything, it's the expats that we sometimes have a difficult time with, just because of the travel restrictions. But there are ways around it. We have very thorough testing protocols. Even before people get on site, everybody gets tested, and temperatures. And but I'd say with some of our expats, we've had to certainly kind of adjust the way things work. So rather than a 2 week off, or 2 week on, 2 week off rotation, sometimes we're extending that. So we're going 3 or 4 weeks on site. It just makes things a little bit easier in the short term. So I'd say we're making changes to how we schedule mostly our expats.
One thing that we're hearing, Aldo, is from Australian METS companies who have worked on a just-in-time supply, maybe from countries like China and other countries in Southeast Asia. Maybe they're looking for more local inputs domestically for their product, because they have been hit. Many businesses have been hit by the either disruption to freight or the relatively increasing cost of freight that might make doing something domestically here in Australia for their company something that they'd be more eager to look at.
Right, John, and thanks for that. Yourself, Warren or Chris, has the reduced mobility caused you to source more locally in terms of skills and other things, or is it sort of status quo?
Hasn't really impacted us on the investment side of the business. We've usually found that in the event that we want to hire consultants to join us on a site visit, they have been able to put together a local team to do just that. I find it interesting that it's always on a voluntary basis. They always say, we can't request our consultants to join you, but they can volunteer to join you. But we haven't had any shortage of volunteers over the course of the last 9-10 months. Perhaps it reflects the intrepid nature of most people in the mining industry, that we dare to go to places that other people don't usually go, even in the best of times. We'll go there in the worst of times. No, it hasn't really, we haven't found that skill shortage on a consulting level. A local level doesn't really apply to us, so one of my other colleagues can address that.
I was going to say, I think for us, we've been quite used to moving skills from Australia to New Zealand as we require, and basically it was almost like a domestic situation. And with New Zealand's restrictions, that's certainly been hard for our project ramp up in the North Island, Waihi. So that is taking skills. I think locally we're definitely trying to look to develop and improve capability at all of our operations. However, another factor is it's up until this year, it's been quite normal for us to move people around, say take people from the Philippines operation and have them located in one of the longer running mines like Macraes, and have them basically learn skills and capability and develop and take it back with them. So that's restricted. So again, we're trying more online or remote, it's not quite the same as being able to go and spend 3 or 4 months in a location and learn and pick up the skills from and share from each other. So that's taking time to get used to and to make any changes to it.
Thanks, Chris. And I guess back to you, John. Is there anything governments could be doing differently or more of to tap into some of the opportunities coming out of the the mobility challenge, but also some of those challenges. Anything you want to add on that point?
I guess, we feel that from the government side that the government's doing a fair bit. If you start at the macro level, there's a lot of economic support for the economy to continue. They have programs like IFAM, the International Freight Assistance Mechanism, which is trying to smooth the freight in and out of Australia. We're simplifying the Export Market Development Grant Scheme, Business Events Grant. But from the Trade and Investment Promotion level, all of the 60 officers from Austrade around the world are working with Australian businesses to try and help them transition to the new normal that we're seeing in the economy. Last week we had something on LATAM, the week before on India, the week before that on Russia. So I guess, we can't tell business, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to deal with this challenge. I guess we need to give them the tools and the information to help them deal in the new world. And I think we're doing a fair bit. Of course, we'd all like to see unrestricted travel, but I just don't think that's the reality. There's going to be quarantine issues around for a while, so we've got to work within that constraint rather than sort of complain that it is a constraint. And I think in general, business have taken that on board.
Great, thanks, John. To the other panelists, anything you'd like to add in terms of, from a mobility perspective, things that government could be helping with in parts of the world that you're operating in?
Yeah, sure. Well, here recently, the government of Canada basically has declared mining an essential service. So what that means is that if you're returning to the country after, say, a mining-related visit, they're not required to self-quarantine for 14 days. So, you still have to quarantine if you have a positive test, obviously, if you come in close contact with those restrictions. But rather than just a mandatory 14-day quarantine for anyone coming into the country, they're basically distinguishing travel between essential, mining related or others, or non-essential travel. So, if you have to travel for work, we're not going to penalize you. Just be smart about it. Otherwise, you're good. So, yeah, I'd say that makes things a little bit easier for us on the return, at least. If we absolutely have to go to site and we come back, it makes things a little bit easier.
And Warren or Chris, anything to add on that? In terms of
I think consistency would help. I mean, the one thing you do note when you're trying to get somewhere is the massive inconsistency from one country to another. And it doesn't seem to be related to the extent of the presence of the virus in that country. So obviously government's reactions and government policies are varying widely, not even depending on the circumstances, but probably depending on policies or beliefs. And obviously that makes things difficult from a planning perspective, but one might argue also difficult from a global perspective in order to fight the virus itself. And if there was one thing I would like to see, would be greater consistency in the applicability of policy.
Yeah, I'd say, Warren, you're exactly right there. It's that consistency, because of all of our different jurisdictions, everyone treats it differently. It's managed differently, from quite harsh to really open. So that it's almost a bit of a maze at the moment, and it changes quite rapidly depending on the situation. So you to stay on top of it and have people in transit, then they get caught up in quarantine, or it does make it more difficult to manage, but that consistency is important.
And so if we look ahead a year or two, do you think we will go back to pre-pandemic ways of behaving, particularly in terms of travel? I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I just thought I'd pose the question because it's a significant change that the world is going through, and how is they going to stay this way, or do you think it will revert to what we used to do before?
I think I've gotten too comfortable being able to stay at home and not travel, and I think the family likes it. So I think inevitably, I think we are all going to travel less. Obviously, we're going to swing back in the pendulum, and we're all going to get back on planes and start traveling. But I don't think we're going to travel nearly as much. And I think we're going to be a lot more wary when we do travel about what health exposures and other risks that we're putting ourselves or exposing ourselves to. So the pendulum will swing back, but I really don't think it'll swing back as much. Certainly another generation will have a different view, but all of us who have lived through the COVID pandemic, I don't think any of us will be traveling as much as we used to.
Yeah, I agree with Warren. I think there's an efficiency and a cost element, and I think we've got used to, we've figured out that, as Warren's example of the the board meeting can be done in 2 hours, doesn't need to be 17 hours and then 2 days travel either side. That said, I think there will be some pent up demand. Clients do, there is still nothing like the individual connection that you have with colleagues or clients or customers or whoever that is. But I think we're going to see it substantially reduced, certainly for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I would agree as well. Like I said earlier, in the M&A business, there are just there are some key items that just can't be replaced by virtual site visits or Zoom calls. Geology, and I'm a geologist. It's always been about boots on the ground. So looking at the rocks, having conversations at a bar, in a restaurant, in a car, or seeing the anti-mining signs in local communities that just don't make it into corporate presentation. So developing relationships in M&A is pretty essential, and it can be difficult with the mobility constraints. So, but I certainly agree. As far as the board meetings, a lot of that type of travel, corporate travel, can probably be trimmed back. You realize that, hey, do we need to do this? Probably not. But I'd say still on the M&A side of things, at least from my perspective, from what I do, I think it's still important to get to sites.
Thank you, Don. Chris.
Yeah, I think some things will stick with us. That enhanced use of virtual settings will definitely stick with us. But yeah, I'm the same in that there's some things you can't replace, and you do need to be there. And we've missed it. But there's some things that I think, the volume of travel, I don't think we'll go back to. So, because you look at it now and you go, well, we've been able to succeed and survive and manage without that level of travel. So it's just get the right balance now.
Well, gentlemen, we're just about running out of time, so I'd like to thank each of you for your contributions today. I think it is definitely an important topic, and one of those that probably a trend that was kicked off before the pandemic, and like many other things, it's accelerated. Hearing what you've had to say, it doesn't seem like we'll go back to how things were anytime soon. That there's been some upsides aside from the challenges and the tragedies that the pandemic has brought on the planet. But from a business perspective, there are some efficiencies to be made. And I guess those wishing to get approval for travel in future will have a tougher time convincing people like yourselves getting approval. So once again, I thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Great.
Thanks, Aldo.
Thank you, Aldo.